So here is the 1176 compressor. This is a famous old studio compressor. And I'll give you a quick tutorial on this one. This is a little bit different from a lot of compressors you might have seen before, but we'll walk through each control as well as what the best use cases are, and we'll listen to some audio today. So you can see I have it bypassed here, and I have our other compressor as well, the CLA-2A, which is an optical compressor, bypassed. The 1176 is a FET compressor. So what that effectively means is that it has a very fast response, or it can have a very fast response, like down to nanoseconds, or very quick milliseconds, I'll put it that way, in the way it responds. It doesn't necessarily clamp down that fast, but it responds very quickly. So this is a really good compressor on a lot of different things, but you also have to realize that this one has a lot more of an effecty sound rather than a transparent sound. So we have several controls. I'll go through the bottom ones here first. This analog selection is for analog noise. We keep that off since we don't want to introduce like electrical or analog noise into the signal path. And there's a revision selection as well, Bluey and Blackie. Bluey is an older version, Blackie is the more modern version. Both sound great. The controls react very different. In a studio use, I would probably navigate more towards the Bluey in a studio use. For live sound, the Blackie or the black edition of the 1176 is a little bit cleaner and, in my opinion, more transparent. A little bit less character, a little bit easier to manipulate on a variety of different voices or instruments, which is why I gravitate towards the Blackie, and I would recommend staying with the way we kind of have it set up here. There are presets. We will make some presets on waves so you can recall things. I started with the vocal preset, which presets the input, output, attack, and release, and then I have tweaked these knobs a little bit for our gain structure. A reminder on gain structure, we usually come in around -20 dBFS, which means 0 is distortion. We want to get some headroom or room before distortion. So normally we would shoot between -25 and -15. The goal is -20, but obviously people have varying volume in the way that they project or play. So obviously that will change, but our target is around -20 just to keep things consistent throughout the board, no pun intended. So we have these controls. I showed you these two. Input is the amount of input gain coming into the compressor. Negative infinity is obviously off. 0 is basically boosting a ton. Unity gain is around here. But the way that this compressor reacts, the threshold is between these two knobs. Think of it this way. The threshold is between these two knobs. You have your input level coming in and hitting the threshold. Then you have your output level with your signal coming out of the compressor. So if we were to put, this is pretty much unity with just a few dB of compression. If I didn't want any compression, I would turn this knob, and then I would have to turn this knob up accordingly to match. As I'm decreasing volume coming into the threshold, it's also decreasing it coming out of the threshold. So I would have to boost that back up. This one I would do to taste and by watching the meter, but also by flipping this in and out, at least during rehearsal. And then during the show or during church service, in our case, you would want to not bring it in and out, but you would make small adjustments on the fly if you had to. The goal is always set it in rehearsal and then focus on mixing during the actual service. So it's usually best to do all this gain staging beforehand and just make very small adjustments on the fly. These attack and release knobs are a little bit different than normal attack and release knobs that you may have seen before. it's just 1 to 7. And the thing to remember is higher number equals faster, or clockwise equals faster for both attack and release. So here we are, 3.5. If I bring it up to 7, the compressor is going to react faster. If I bring it down to 1, it's going to react slower. Now, fast and slow on this is extremely fast and extremely, well, it's extremely fast all the time, but the way that it listens to things and then reacts kind of is on like a sliding scale as you use this. So if you have a slow attack, it does still react very quickly. But the way it recovers from that react on the release side of things is a little bit more dramatic. Fast release is very fast on this one. Slow release is pretty darn slow. So the attack times are super fast, all of them, but the release times can be pretty quick, moderate, or super slow. On a vocal, we usually would use pretty fast. So it's not clamping down and staying clamped down. Then we have this ratio knob, 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 12 to 1, 20 to 1, and all buttons in, which is like infinity-ish, essentially infinity once you get above 20 to 1. That's limiting. But this also affects the way the compressor responds to attack and release times. So if you select 8 instead of 4, you will actually change the way it's reacting, both threshold-wise and the attack and release times. So do be aware of that. If you just switch ratio, it may not immediately give you more gain reduction. You may have to adjust some things. I recommend 4 to 1 or 8 to 1 for vocals. We can probably keep it on 4 to 1. On some vocals, you may want to try 8 to 1, but I've found better results with 4 to 1 overall. Then we have our metering options, gain reduction, which is the amount of compression. We have our input gain coming in. We want that, again, to be around here for -18 or -20. And then output gain, same thing. We don't want to boost too much. It could be a little bit higher than input gain, but we don't want to go above like -15, -12 in our case. And then there's this master on-off button here. So let's send some signal through it. First without the LA2A in, and then with. So I'll start with it off. I'm just going to give you a full mix here so you can hear it out and in what it's doing.
God from age to age, though the earth may pass away.
Bring the output gain down a little bit here. So we have about half a dB to 1 dB of compression. I'm going to bring it up again.
You're faithful and true. Though the storms
very fast attack and release.
May blow, I'll remain steadfast. And
turn it off.
My heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. We sing great.
So what this is doing is it's evening out some of the peaks and some of the valleys in his overall vocal amplitude or the levels coming into the console and out of this compressor. So you saw right there, I adjusted some of the input and output gains. I gave him a little bit more input so that the compressor would react just a little bit more. And this will change once we bring the LA2A in. And then I brought down the output because I could tell it was boosting his vocal. And I actually don't want to do that. Especially at this stage. I want to keep things consistent coming into it and coming out of it. I can always add gain at the fader, or once I'm pretty comfortable with things, I could add like 2 dB of gain here to just make him stand out a little bit. The goal is that you want to keep your gain structure through the entire signal chain very consistent. All right, so let's listen one more time. I'm going to stick the LA2A in, and then we'll adjust some of these parameters on the 1176. I'm not going to show you all the attack and release values, but I will give you an idea based on watching this meter. Go ahead and watch and see how it reacts differently as we go. The LA2A is going to take a little bit of the peaks off before it hits this, so it won't react quite as much as before, but this is a good use case. So LA2A in, we're going to add the 1176 in a second.
God from age to age, though the earth may pass away, your word
So
remains the
1176 is in
same.
now.
Yeah, your history can prove there's nothing you can't do.
You probably heard how his vocal got tighter.
Though the storms may
This is probably a little bit much compression for him, so I'm going to bring back the input gain a little bit.
And let my heart learn when you speak.
Alright, I'm going to increase the attack here so it goes faster.
We sing, great is your faithfulness.
See how that sped up the reaction time? Not necessarily what we want. And slow.
Great is your faithfulness.
Still fast, but a little bit slower. This is a good spot to be in right here, 3.5-ish. Then I'm going to slow down the release. See how the release is now really slow? So his vocal is actually being more compressed now, and it's not returning to not being compressed as quick. So we do want to make that pretty fast. In a live setting, especially in the room, I might bring the release back to like 5.
There's nothing you can't do.
Just so it's not like pumping a lot. But really between 5 and 7 is a good range. For broadcast, I would go as fast as this is set currently. Just so there's a lot more room, or a lot more, this response time basically is shorter in the tail. Next we're going to look at the metering. So it's going up to -12, but I'm not too worried about that. It's hovering around -18 most of the time. This is good. And then same on the output.
From the rising sun to the setting.
So if I take these both out, see how it's pretty consistent level with these in or out. But his vocal is getting lost in the mix as his volume goes up or down. I'm going to go to the middle here again so you can hear the level. Bring one compressor in. That does help level things a little bit. And now the second one. Back to gain reduction here so you can see what's happening. So it's taking off all of his peaks and letting some of the lower parts that are still important to be heard come through well. So that's a quick overview. Again, the most important things, you don't want to have too much compression. So in low to moderate volume parts, you just barely want to be tickling this compressor, and you just barely want to be tickling this compressor. Just enough that it's not really compressing those lower levels. Maybe 1 to 3 dB of compression max. Then on his higher levels, each of these compressors will do a little bit more. This one might probably best to put it between like 2, 5, or 7. Not really more than that in the higher parts. And then this one, same thing. You don't want to go. You don't want to be redlining this compressor like -20. That will actually make his vocal sound super compressed in a mix. It'll make it sound super up front too, like really in your face, but we don't want that necessarily. We want the dynamics that he is singing overall to match what he is giving us. We just want to tighten it up a little bit for the benefit of the full mix. So hopefully that makes sense. This one's a little bit different. Input is your gain coming into the threshold. Output is your gain to match your levels if you didn't have the compressor in, essentially. And you do have to adjust them in accordance with one another. If you bring this one up, this one needs to come down. If you bring this one down, this one needs to go up.